Wokeism has become the latest trend in American culture, sadly, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. Now, my next guest says that there is a systemic con behind it, and he's here to break it down. Victor Davis Hanson is the senior fellow for the Hoover Institution, professor, author, and of course his book, The Case for Trump, a must-read. He joins me now. This, Patrisse Cullors, who's head of BLM, I think that kind of also was a point of no return for a lot of people, especially in the Black community, because there are victims that we have seen on television who they've had either loved ones, either it's gang violence, or maybe they weren't innocent. Maybe they were criminals and it was a police-involved shooting, or maybe who knows, justified homicide. There've been too many, my point, that have been speaking up against BLM, saying that you fundraised off of the death of our family member or our loved one, and now you have Patrisse Cullors, who has 3 homes in some of the whitest and the bougiest areas of California and elsewhere. That seemed to also, Mark, be a huge point of no return.
I think it is. I think we forgot that there is a huge class division, not just among whites, in the case of woke, but among minorities as well. I mean, when you have Oprah and her $90 million estate in Montecito lamenting and trading stories of victimization with Meghan Markle and her $16 million estate, nobody really feels that they're victims. Or Michelle coming out of her $14 million Martha's Vineyard and saying, oh, I was treated badly, or this, or Barack Obama coming out of his $8 million Colorama house. Nobody really has sympathy. So there's a sense that this is an elite phenomenon, a top-down, not a grassroots. These are academics, they're lawyers, they're activists, they're celebrities, they're athletes, LeBron, et cetera, but they don't deal with the real life issues in the inner city or even in the suburbs. When people in Portland or Seattle say, well, what am I going to do when I call 9/11? That's not really an act of racism, as you implied. And when you have all these leaders that just have disdain, I mean, Nicole Hannah-Jones says, looting it's just property, it's not violence. Or the mayor of Minneapolis says, well, it was just brick and mortar when you burned down, that doesn't matter. Or when we had the Seattle mayor say, well, they destroyed property, but it's a summer of love. So maybe that property belonged to a poor person who saved for 5 years to buy a car or a business. And so there's this, I think that's something the conservatives and the Republicans need to really focus on, the elite abyss between the woke cadre that is foisting this upon us and the results of it on all everyday people of every race.
Yeah, we're talking to Victor Davis Hanson. I love what you wrote in one of your recent pieces. You said, but the idea that your race or your appearance is incidental and not essential to who you are is a very radical idea, very biblical idea as well. Talk a little bit about that, because I don't think I had really viewed it in those terms before.
Well, there's not very many multiracial nations in history. They don't work because people's natural tendency is to be tribal. They feel more comfortable or safe by people who look superficially the same. And the places where that was not true, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Soviet Union was multiracial, but they used a level of violence and coercion to force people to give up their tribal identity. Tito, as long as Tito was alive as a communist strongman, there was no tribal violence in Yugoslavia. The moment he died, they couldn't keep the lid on the kettle. And so I think we got to realize that today in the world, there's only about 2 or 3 nations like us, India maybe, and Brazil, but they don't do a very good job. So rather than damning us because we're not perfect, I think people have to say, this was really an aberration, that these founders came from Britain and the English-speaking countries, Ireland or Scotland, and they came over here, and the first thing they did is they created an idea that would make themselves irrelevant. And that, in other words, that all men are created equal, the natural trajectory of that idea, we go back and forth, we take 2 steps back, was what we have now. And I can't see anybody in history that's ever done that. A majority population said that our race, our religion, our appearance is not what we are. And so that's why people come here. And that's what I think, if everything the left has said during this woke moment were true, we wouldn't have 2 million people trying to get across the border who are not white. They know something that the elite are not telling us. Either they're disingenuous and they feel that okay, we'll say it's racist, but we really deep down inside know it's not because these people want to get in here, or they're saying, well, as long as we call everybody racist, they will be so afraid they'll let in more immigrants and the immigrants will change the demography and the electoral college dynamics. I don't know what they're doing, but when you look at immigration, that's a real strong refutation of the whole woke
Right.
narrative.
Completely. And that goes into, right, how the founders envisioned this country, e pluribus unum, from out of many one. You have one with the identity of freedom and liberty, and that's really ultimately the only tribalism, really free people and individual liberty that should really be recognized.